Thank you very much, Jasper. Thank you for the opportunity. Hello, everybody. Good evening. And I'm going to share my screen with you and jump straight into it. There we go. I hope you guys can see my screen. I trust that's in order. Everybody, thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I really look forward to sharing the rest of this session with you. As Jasper mentioned, last time we started with a book, and just to give those of you a bit of context who might have missed the last session, I wrote this book very recently, started on this journey about a year ago, and tonight I want to share with you chapter 2, which is rebooting the operating system. So just to give you a bit of context, in my life journey, I've always been very curious in terms of how I can get more out of life. So I've always been fascinated about the psychology and the biological factors that will enable me to get a better quality of life. And that is how the idea of this book was born. Okay, so this is the journey, and these are the chapters. So once again, just to give those of you who didn't join last time a bit of context, I wrote this book to provide people with building blocks in terms of how to become the best versions of themselves. Now, this is not so much about improving yourself, but it's about becoming yourself. It's about actualizing your latent potential and becoming everything that you are capable of being. So in the last 2 decades, I've researched the most useful techniques I could find in neuroscience, neurosemantics, psychology, cognitive science, psychoneuroimmunology, epigenetics, and lifestyle. So as you can see on that slide before you, Keep Thriving, the book, is mapped out as an actual journey. The challenge I pose to you, the reader, is to explore this new territory with me, and I'm the mountain guide or your meta coach. So as you can see on the left, the book is mapped out as a journey, and I'm going to take you through these chapters on the theoretical side. Through these chapters, we're also going to go through this pyramid that I call Unlocking the Potential Pyramid. So this book is really about helping you update your mental navigation software for you to see beyond the illusions in life that may keep you stuck. So this journey is about bringing you to a choice point that can help you change the trajectory in your life. I want to just illustrate again that, as I mentioned last time, there are many similarities between Jasper's journey from struggle to significance. And in this gig philosophy, the Keep Thriving philosophy shares some very interesting similarities. Now, first of all, the main thing that I want to help people achieve is to move from a survival state to a thriving state. And it is really about getting over that line of ignorance and indifference. So this is really to help people get a better understanding of their cognitive and emotional faculties in terms of how to better use and utilize these unconscious processes. So this journey will help you to enable you to take charge of your programming or your software, what I refer to as the mental side of your life. And if you go through this journey, you'll be equipped to know precisely how to use thoughts, feelings, and actions to optimize your health and longevity. In other words, how to use your cognitive, emotional, biological arsenal to achieve a higher quality, but also quantity of life. So that's just a bit of background. And tonight we get to chapter 2, rebooting the operating system. As you can see, last time we did chapter 1, which was the biological code. And if any of you missed it, it was really about the idea that we are born into an environment with a specific genetic code. We inherit this genetic code and this environment. In other words, we don't have a choice with regards to it. We inherit this. But how we choose to respond towards that environment and that genetic code will really determine the quality and the success of life that we experience. And that starts with rebooting the operating system. And the core idea in this chapter is really about taking ownership and responsibility for what is within your control and how that empowers you to influence your future and help you achieve the outcomes in your life that you desire. If you don't, you will remain a victim to your circumstances. This is why I call it the rebooting of your operating system. And as you know, if you have a computer or a cell phone or any technological device, often if it's battling to communicate or if it can't perform its function, the first thing we need to do is reboot it or reset it. So that is really, in order for your programs, your mental stuff to run smooth, often you need a reboot. And this is what this chapter is about. That's why I start with this chapter before we go on further to the other mechanisms. You need to take control for and responsibility of your primary state powers. Now, I'll explain to you what primary state powers is in a short while. It's only after taking responsibility that you can start using your mental programming powers and update your mental software for its full benefit. Okay, tonight's contents. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go over these ideas. Responsibility, the word and what it means. I'm going to go over what is really within your control. And then I'm going to discuss the primary state powers. The choice is yours. We always have a choice. You determine the outcome of your life only if you take ownership and control. The word responsibility is very interestingly made up of two distinctive words, response and ability. This word not only describes your innate ability to respond, but also your choice as to how you respond. One of my favorite authors, Viktor Frankl, wrote this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space, our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The reality is, the more responsibility you give to yourself, the more you will have the ability to respond. You will never be in a position to influence your life outcomes without taking responsibility. This is really no trivial matter, and I put great emphasis on this. So this is what life looks like on any given day. We have an event or an experience. In other words, there's a trigger out there in the world in your life. Now, we have a choice in terms of how we respond to that trigger, that event, or that experience. That choice that we have in terms of our response determines our state. Now, your state is a cognitive, emotional state of being. It's your mind-body state of being. And this state determines your outcome. It could be positive or it could be negative. So, to just take it a step further, we experience a trigger, and that results that we go into a specific state of mind and body. We have a choice over that state. Now, over time, these states habituate and they become frames of mind. They become paradigms and determine how you perceive the world around you. Now, all your mental functions like thinking, feeling, valuing, believing, perceiving, operate from, in accordance with your state of mind. So this is really important in terms of how we respond to the triggers in our environments, because they become self-fulfilling prophecies to a large degree, and they influence how we perceive the world around us. So this unconscious process affects much of your daily life. And this is also one of the foundational principles for emotional intelligence, and it comes down to state awareness or state management. Now, I discuss more of this in later chapters, but suffice to say, we are always in a state and we have a choice in terms of how we respond to the triggers in our environment. Now, a very interesting statistic is that 100% of people who don't take responsibility for their lives remain victims. These people remain victims to circumstances, life events, past experiences, genetics, and what other people say and do. These people find reasons or excuses, and they find it much easier to blame others. But the reality is, if you blame others, you give your power away. When you take responsibility, you take that power back and you have the ability to transform your life. So taking ownership of your responsibility gives you a lot more control over your life. The reality is everyone has the superpower, but not everyone is aware of it. And the reality is most people don't use it for the development of their full potential. Many people abdicate this power and they choose to live in a disempowered way. They evade responsibility. This is the giving away of your power and your freedom of choice. These people behave as if they have no choice. By giving away your responsibility, you give away your choice and your ability to respond. So I'm really unpacking this word. The reality is, people who do this still remain liable for their decisions, and they will experience the results and the repercussions of their decisions. So, by not accepting responsibility, we're not liberated from the consequences of our decisions and actions. We just choose to give up the influence we have over our own lives. And by not deliberately choosing, our choice is made for us and we become victims. The reality is, and there's research that illustrates this, that being a victim or having a victim mindset breeds resentment, hostility, which is normally followed by physical or mental disease. That's why I believe taking responsibility is the rebooting of the operating system of your brain. If you start with this, all the other changes in your thinking and behaving required to live a healthy and fulfilling life will be much easier. You need to take responsibility to use your coding, your software, and your lifestyle to full effect. For the purpose of this presentation and for this illustration, I want to categorize people in two broad categories. So let's say there are two types of people in the world. Firstly, we get the victims or marionettes. So the dictionary defines a marionette as a puppet worked by strings or a person who is easily manipulated or controlled. These people live in a stimulus response world. Things, events, triggers make them respond in a certain way. They automatically respond mentally, emotionally, verbally, or behaviorally. There's a stimulus and there's a response, and there's nothing that happens in between. The reality is victims are not victims because they've been dealt a bad hand in life or because they suffered more misfortune or bad treatment than others, but because of their mindset. They believe their condition, state, behavior, success, happiness, etc., is all the way it is because of someone or something else, but it's never because of their own decisions or actions. These victims or marionettes use language like, you make me feel, you make me do, you make me say. Excuses and blaming are in the order of the day. There's always a transference of responsibility. These people are often very defensive, they're reactive, and generally unresourceful. They're always at the mercy of their circumstances, mood, emotions, or whatever else is happening around them. They are relegated to be a product of their environment, and their fate is determined. They are what we call the puppets of today. The reality is most animals also live in this world. It's a very instinctive world. So if people fall within the victim group and they act in those ways, they're not very different from a one-celled amoeba organism that also just responds directly from the stimulus that it receives in its environment. So this is a very primitive biological way of operating, but there are many people that actually operate like this. On the other hand, we get the responsible. And this group of people live in a choice world. They live, act, and respond as if they always have a choice about how to respond. They recognize that their responses operate as a function of their thinking, and that thinking happens between the moment of stimulus and response. They reflect a consciousness and awareness that is exclusively human. They live a life of empowerment and are in charge of their own lives. These, the responsible people, they will use language like I think, I feel, I choose to. These people own their responsibility. They also own who, where, and what they are. They hold themselves responsible. These people don't have the need to defend themselves, and they're often very resourceful. They intentionally choose and manage their emotions and mind states. Their states, their future is their choice. They are the emancipated. They are the free. They have matured to realize and make use of that space between stimulus and response. That space that Viktor Frankl refers to as where our growth and freedom lies. That's really a profound idea and notion. So, I have a question for you as viewer. Have you taken full responsibility for yourself? And it's something that we don't necessarily have a critical moment that we have in life that we can say, okay, this or that happened and I took responsibility for myself. I'm not asking if you make your own bed. I'm really asking if you've taken full responsibility for yourself. The reality is most of us don't get taught this in school, and there are many environmental factors, circumstances, childhood environments, trauma, other life events plays a massive role in the development of these skills. The reality is we cannot choose that environment, as I illustrated in chapter 1. We can, however, choose how we respond to that environment and what happens from this day forward. Now, the interesting thing that many of you probably know is that we live in an age of quick fixes and outsourcing. Now, the research illustrates that victim mindset people are more likely to fall prey to quick fixes. Now, we're all guilty of this at some point in our lives. I've been guilty of trying a quick fix more than once. But in reality, victims keep on falling for fads, trends, and quick fixes. Why is this the case? Well, the simple answer is because victims or marionettes like to outsource their responsibility to others. They outsource their health to a doctor, their fitness to a personal trainer, their nutrition to a fad diet, their weight loss to a magic pill, their chronic disease to lifelong medication, their happiness to a partner, their finances to a financial advisor, their spiritual growth to a priest, their mental health to a psychologist. Now, of course, these roles or these people or listening to them and getting advice from them is not inherently wrong. We need guidance. The problem becomes when we create too much of a dependence and a codependence on these external sources. The reality is these people, these roles, with however good their intentions are, they can take your money, but they cannot take ownership and responsibility for your life. The thing is, we need a reality check, and we shouldn't be ignorant that nobody cares for you as much as you. This brings me to interesting scientific findings about the concept of locus of control. And your locus of control really refers to a set of personal beliefs which is either internal or external. Having an internal locus of control is having an active problem-solving mindset. You have the view that things are within your control and you take ownership and responsibility. Then there are people who have an external locus of control. Now, this view is having a passive, deterministic mindset where things are mostly outside of your control. You view problems as permanent and you're outside of your influence. So there's a very interesting study, a research paper by Porhosezenda, a tricky name to pronounce. In 2017, this study revealed a strong correlation between your locus of control, whether it's internal or external, and your health outcomes and longevity. So where your locus of control is actually affects your physical and mental health, as well as your longevity. They found that having an internal locus of control had positive psychological and behavioral effects. These individuals who score high on internal locus of control are more likely to actively use coping strategies focused on solving problems. Then, on the contrary, those who fall within the external locus of control group, this will lead to individuals' reduced ability to fight disease, more mental disorders, depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, as well as other maladaptive behaviors. So interesting research to illustrate that your locus of control plays an important role in healthy behaviors and beliefs. So I want to ask you another question. Do you live inside out or outside in? Is your locus of control internal or external? And I'm just going to pose a few questions, and maybe just to yourself, answer this question and be honest with yourself. Where do you feel you sit on this spectrum? Do you feel that life happens to you? Do you feel that you're a victim of what others say and do? Do you feel that you have little or no control over your life? Do you feel that things, your job, your boss, criticism, inflation, economic downturn, whatever, gets you down? Do you feel that you live in a stimulus response world? Or do you feel like you are the chess player rather than the chess piece in your life? Do you feel that you're in control of your life? Do you think and feel that you are the architect of your future? Do you think and feel that you are the author who writes the script of your life? And do you feel in charge of your own responses? So this is just the opportunity for some introspection. So what is really in your control? Have you thought about this before? Think about before we go ahead. What can you say is truly and honestly within your control? Maybe think of 2 or 3 things that's really within your control. Now, if you have identified 2 or 3 things that's within your control, have you actually taken ownership of it? If you haven't, then can you really exert an influence over it? So I want to establish, have you taken responsibility for what's within your control? I can tell you that these things are not in your control. Others' opinions, others' actions, what happened in the past, and disruptions to your plans, amongst many other things. But these are some of the things that really is outside of your control. When it comes to taking responsibility, it It really is the actual cure or remedy for most lifestyle related health problems. Now, the Greek philosophers also argued that the core of intelligence is knowing what is within your control. So this is like age-old philosophy. The thing is, if you take responsibility, you set the trajectory for your life. You avoid feelings of guilt and resentment towards yourself, and this itself can avoid mental decay and disease. So, the ability that enables you to keep thriving it really involves four basic primary state powers. And you may already know these powers. You may just never have thought about it like the following. They are the powers of thinking and feeling, which are private, and then the powers of speaking and behaving or acting that are public. In other words, they're visible to others. So these four basic powers support almost everything that you do in your life. So I have a few more questions for you. To what extent have you acknowledged the existence of these powers? Have you ever thought of this? And have you acknowledged that they actually exist? To what extent have you recognized that these basic powers gives you the ability to respond to the world around you? To what extent have you fully accepted and owned these powers as your own and taken responsibility for them? And last question, how many of these powers have you given away to others? So in order to control your life, you have to, first of all, recognize, accept, and own these powers. Your thinking, feeling, speaking, and acting. So it's one thing to know this and for this to be head knowledge. I mean, that's really a great step to become aware of this. That's phenomenal. But I don't do this in these talks because I'm only going through the theoretical components of the chapters and the book because we only have so much time. But in the book, I take the reader through exercises. So it really is a workbook. So we discuss this concept and then I give the reader an exercise to do this. And knowing this is not enough. You have to get the knowledge into your nervous system and you have to close the knowing doing gap. And that's when knowledge becomes wisdom. So I make use of cognitive behavioral psychology and neurosemantic techniques to help people make this part of their reality if you participate in the exercises within the book. So just as a summary, nobody can make you angry. Your anger is your own. Your sadness, loneliness, discouragement, or any other negative emotion that you experience is your own. Others may push your buttons, but that's only because you gave your remote away. So, by being crystal clear about owning your power zone, or these four basic powers, you can no longer be a victim in life. There will always be triggers in our environments, maybe what some people say or do, or any other unfavorable conditions that can evoke you to respond in a negative way. But the choice of how you respond always resides with you. You don't have to be a victim to your circumstances. And you take responsibility for yourself. In the Spider-Man movie, the late Uncle Ben famously says, with great power comes great responsibility. I like to turn that upside down. And I like to say, with responsibility comes great power. Thank you very much, guys. That is the end of the presentation for tonight. And it really is no trivial matter. People don't realize the essence of responsibility. And I know Jasper mentions it quite a few times in his book. He doesn't necessarily specifically frame it like this, but there are people that take on their responsibility, they take on their load, and they take on what they have been dealt with, and other people claim to be victims, and they will always remain victims if they never take responsibility for their life. So this is really just a touch of what I discuss in that chapter. And as I say, to go through these exercises really changes your mind. It's not about just knowing this, it's about actually doing this and living this where the actual change is experienced.